Now that is how you end a Marvel series. Or season.
Congratulations. Y'all had an awfully long journey to get here.
Hey guys, it's Sean O'Connell, the managing editor here at CinemaBlend, and my backdrop is different because I'm on the road. I have to point out, because you guys gave me such a hard time, that one time I wore a Superman shirt to do a Loki breakdown, that of course I have a Spider-Man shirt, and my TVA jacket to let you guys know that I've officially been recruited into the artificial organization that is TVA, and I saved it just for this, the staggering finale to the first season of Loki. And yes, we say first season because hopefully you stayed through to the mid-credit sequence, which wasn't a huge reveal in terms of characters, but it did confirm the fact that Loki is going to be the first Marvel Studio series on Disney Plus to get a second season. So we're going to break down everything that happened in episode 6, what it might mean for the future of the MCU, and all the great details that they packed into Loki. So make sure, before you keep going on this video, that you have caught up on all the episodes of Loki and that you've seen episode 6. We're going to do a full analysis right now. And if you want to keep up with everything that we're doing here on CinemaBlend, hit subscribe, turn on your notifications, and follow along with us because we're doing a lot of really great stuff.
Come on.
Okay, let's kick off with the big reveal of who the person is behind the TVA, and it was Kang.
Duh.
And listen, I'm not going to take a lot of pride in saying that I guessed correctly because I was, on the fence. There were a lot of arguments from people who were saying, well, they would never really introduce Kang the Conqueror in episode 6 of a Disney Plus TV series that maybe not everybody is watching, and I kind of believed that. But it turns out that we did get to meet, once we entered into the Citadel, Jonathan Majors, who has been confirmed to play Kang the Conqueror. Now, he's not called, or he wasn't called, Kang the Conqueror over the course of this episode, but everything that we learned about him essentially pointed to the fact that he is going to be a Kang the Conqueror. He makes a joke about the fact that he's gone by multiple names.
A ruler, a conqueror, he who remains, a jerk.
And then I think that statue that's at the very end, the very last shot of the series where it used to be the Timekeepers, now I think that that's Kang in his final form. So here's what we learned about Kang the Conqueror and how he's going to fit into the MCU. Most of the stuff that he set up with the TVA was a smokescreen.
Creepy. Right. I like it.
It's myth that he established, but a lot of it is true. The fact that they referred to him as somebody who lived on Earth in the 31st century was the first indication that this is Kang the Conqueror from Marvel, because that's essentially his backstory in the comics. And he was a scientist who had discovered that there were other universes stacked on top of our own, and they were it was a multiverse in the way that all these different places coexisted at the very same time, that there were different versions of Kang, or He Who Remains. He Who Remains is who they called him over the course of this episode. For the benefit of this analysis, we're going to call him Kang for everything moving forward. He figured out how these variants can essentially communicate with each other, and he says at first it was positive, right? Everybody sort of got along, they shared ideas, but eventually the evil side of man started to corrupt their thinking, and it led to this multiversal war.
Hence, the TVA.
All of that's true. Kang, it turns out, is the one who remains because he is the last one standing at the end of the multiversal war. He has essentially defeated all of the Kang variants.
Hence, you're welcome.
So Kang is essentially saying, in a very strange analogy that we're going to get to later, that there is no free will, and everything that you've done up to this point, especially Loki and Sylvie, to get to this point, he is established. He says, I've basically paved the road. I know you're coming here. I know everything that's going to happen. Until he gets to this one part where he finally says,
we just crossed the threshold.
And from here on out, I don't know what's going to happen. He gives them this choice that they're going to get into. And where we go from that is the big swing that Loki episode 6 takes, and the one that's going to have such a major impact on the MCU going forward.
Yes. What's the worst that can happen?
So essentially, Sylvie completes the mission that she's been on from the time that we met her at the beginning of Loki. She meant to figure out who was behind the TVA, who's the wizard behind the curtain, and she's given the opportunity by Kang to essentially choose, hey, you can leave well enough alone and I'll continue manipulating the timeline and keeping everything in check, and if you are to kill me, you're going to have to deal with them because it's essentially going to blast open the multiverse and create chaos and havoc for everybody in the MCU. And Loki, to this point, is basically saying to Sylvie, like, hold on, wait, like, stop, let's not do this. But he is not able to convince her fully she is on this mission. She's going to get it completed, and she does plunge her dagger into Kang's heart. And instead of a theatrical death sequence, he essentially just turns to her and says, which is chilling because he knows that there's other versions of him that are going to be coming. But none of that matters to Sylvie. As much as Loki can try to convince her with the fact that he is, kind of broken away from who Loki is, and he's fallen for her in a way that he hasn't before, she can't prevent the fact that she's going to get rid of this guy who she believes has caused her so much pain. I don't think that we found out fully what her Nexus event was, but we could probably get to that in season 2 because now that we confirmed that that's happening. So we see outside of the Citadel and still inside of the Void these branches breaking off of the timeline, and we are to assume that this is all of the multiverses branching off into different directions. And to that end, Sylvie pushes Loki through a portal that she uses Kang's little wrist dealy to open up, and she pushes him through. He lands in it. He thinks he's in the TVA, but he runs around to try and find Mobius. Mobius does not know who he is, indicating that Loki has landed in another timeline, or at least another multiverse. And if you look at the two, actually, there's a scene right before that with B-15 and Mobius, and they're saying, well, there's no turning back now, kind of thing, and all the multiverses are branching off. He's very rumpled, and his tie is undone in the first scene, and then when Loki catches up with Mobius later, he's way more pressed. I think it's even a different color shirt by a slight shade. His tie is done, so you can tell that it's a different multiverse, but close enough that that's definitely a different Mobius who Loki has caught up to. So, listen, in an episode that essentially started with a reference to the Big Bang and had this amazing montage of really cool MCU lines, I think that moving forward, Sylvie's decision to eliminate Kang and to not let him just keep status quo is going to be the Big Bang that changes everything for the MCU moving forward, because as they say,
no turning back now.
Who said anything about turning back?
With all of the stuff happening in the Citadel, I can kind of understand why you might have forgot what happened to Judge Renslayer. But she's a very important character, and we need to know where she kind of is heading now that we know that a second season is coming. She has asked Miss Minutes to provide her with files that would lead to the very beginning of the creation of the TVA. She doesn't get that instead from Miss Minutes, but Miss Minutes, who is clearly working for Kang because she's in the Citadel, she returns to Judge Renslayer and says, here are the files you asked for. And she's like, no, these aren't them. I didn't want that. And Miss Minutes is like,
but he thinks this'll be more useful.
So I'm gonna diverge into a little bit of comic book history here because it's a little bit important to know who Judge Renslayer is before she became Judge Renslayer and the identity that she has taken on, because we do sort of diverge into her time on Earth before she became a variant. B-15 again sort of branches off on a little Nexus event, goes to Ohio where she catches up with where Renslayer was before she became a TVA agent. And if you zoom in on the diploma behind her desk on her office, she's labeled as Rebecca Terminet. And so you dig into who Rebecca Terminet was. She was an alias that essentially Ravonna used because she has a relationship with Kang over the years. They eventually, Rebecca and Kang, form a relationship in one of these storylines that goes through. And so when she goes back through the door and tells Mobius, I'm going looking for free will, it suggests to me that she was on her way to meet up with or reunite with Kang, because I think that she was ultimately working for him. When Mobius comes back from the Void and she says, look, you can't get in the way of our mission. And I think our mission is maintain the timeline the way that Kang wanted to do, because to go against that would be to introduce chaos. I think it's interesting that, it's an open-ended ending. We'll catch up with her at some point eventually, but you don't cast someone like Gugu Mbatha Raw and use her in a bureaucratic role necessarily without having a plan to put her to great use later. And I think that she's going to play a bigger part as Kang starts to develop, possibly when he shows up as the villain in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and possibly in season 2 of Loki. So we'll find out what happens when we get to that.
You're a flea on the back of a dragon. In for one hell of a ride.
But let's get back around to the two main Lokis who have been driving this story forward. And of course, I mean the two Lokis played by Tom Hiddleston and Sophia Di Martino. So they both went in different directions. Tom Hiddleston tried to win over Lady Loki and say to her that getting rid of Kang was going to be universe altering, essentially. And even though he had led her up to that point, they had a very interesting interaction together where he says to her essentially,
Because you can't trust. And I can't be trusted.
this whole show was about, can you go against what you are destined to be? And I thought in Tom Hiddleston's Loki that we saw a lot of growth for him to get to the point where at the end of it, he didn't have the mission at hand. He wasn't necessarily the trickster who would be pulling the rug out from underneath different people. He was looking at the greater good and seemed very upset when Sylvie pushed him through the portal and left him in this alternate TVA because they weren't on the same page. She had a great line where she says, how come you and I aren't seeing this the same way? They're supposed to be variants of each other, but they both were approaching the complication with Kang from different perspectives. So where do we leave them? Well, Sylvie, when you think about it, she's still in the void. And the void is, well, she has Kang's wrist piece, I guess, and that's something that she could potentially use, the power of that, or maybe there's other tools that are in the Citadel that could potentially get her out of the void, because we've been told the void is a difficult place to get out of. But we left Sylvie sort of living with the decision that she made. The ramifications of that are what are going to affect our main Loki, the Loki we've been following through the course of the MCU, which is the fact that he got dumped into the TVA. But we now know that it's not the TVA that he'd been going back and forth in the entire time, because by the time he catches up with Mobius has no idea who he is. He believes that he's an analyst. Loki's trying to confess all the things that they did, that they ran into Kang. Sylvie ultimately betrayed Loki and plunged her dagger into Kang, and in the act of doing that, as we mentioned, ripped the multiverse into various threads, and we're going to be dealing with the repercussions of that moving forward. I'm going to get to that in a second, but before I jump to that section, I want to discuss some really fascinating symbolism that I thought that the show weaved into episode number 6.
Let's get all this out of the way.
Now, this might be a bit of a stretch, but the apple that Kang is eating the entire time caught my eye, because it's not like there's a supermarket down the street from the Citadel that he can pick up produce. So it's there for a very deliberate reason. And the more I thought about it, the more I kind of realized that, wait a second, we're in a kind of a Garden of Eden scenario where Loki would be Adam and Sylvie would be Eve, and if you're taking the analogy one step forward, then of course Kang is the serpent.
Interesting that your head would go to that.
The apple gives it away. The apple's a little on the nose, but the whole thing is somewhat biblical, to the point where when they first enter into the Citadel, Miss Minutes shows up to almost tempt them with a resolution that could give them everything that they think they've been fighting for this entire time, and leave everything alone. And of course, the serpent tries to tempt Adam and Eve while they're in the garden. And Kang has a line at one point.
You came to kill the devil.
But essentially, I'm the solution to the problem right now, and if you get rid of me, you're going to have even bigger problems to deal with. That is very much the Garden of Eden, the way that the story of the Garden of Eden played out. Adam and Eve were given a choice: eat the apple and implement the idea of original sin, and kind of pull the veils away from your eyes and see how the rest of the world is. And it was, Eve in the biblical story who ended up biting the serpent's apple and stripping them out of the safety of the Garden of Eden. Well, I'm not saying that the TVA or the Citadel or the Void were safety measures, but the way that Kang sort of said it was, hey, I'm trying to maintain a cosmic balance here, and if you disrupt this, it's going to be detrimental to everything going forward. So the minute that Sylvie sort of bites the apple or plunges her dagger into Kang's chest, she is creating a new reality. And to use the biblical story going forward, and just to sort of end it, for the MCU, this is going to be the Big Bang moment of the beginning moving forward of Adam and Eve, Loki and Sylvie, getting kicked out of the garden, and that the existence that we knew previously, everything that was on the sacred timeline that led us through the Infinity Saga, is now going to be wiped away. And everything moving forward is very, very different, and it's going to be able to be traced back to that moment.
That's the gambit.
All right, let's finally take a step back and talk about big picture, how Loki Season 1 is going to impact the MCU going forward. And this is something that I think Marvel has been building up to from the time that WandaVision debuted on Disney+. Marvel wants to get to a point where the television shows and the movies are working hand in hand. In WandaVision, we meet Agatha Harkness and the introduction of witchcraft, and by the end of that season, Elizabeth Olsen has essentially been turned into the classic Scarlet Witch, and then she's out studying someplace where we know she's going to end up in Doctor Strange. That's an example of a TV show feeding directly into a movie. For people who saw Black Widow, most recently, there was a character who was introduced in the mid-credits sequence. I won't mention who it is, in case you're watching this video and haven't seen Black Widow yet, who ties very directly into some of the action that we've seen in Falcon and Winter Soldier, and it's teasing a direction where that character can take some of these characters and sort of move them forward. The introduction of Kang in episode 6 of Loki is Marvel essentially saying you now have to be paying attention to both. Like, there's no division between the movies and the television shows, because they're all going to be feeding into the big MCU as a whole. The repercussions of what Sylvie did by, killing this version of Kang is going to be felt everywhere moving forward. Now, I don't think that it's going to be in the immediate MCU movies, because the next two to come are Shang-Chi and Eternals. Let's start with Shang-Chi just for a second. That seems like a classic sort of introduction solo Marvel movie, almost the way that Captain Marvel did for Brie Larson's character. Eternals, I'm going to stop just for a second about Eternals because, and I went back and watched the original trailer for Eternals, the pattern and the design of the Eternals ship and their costumes and some of the things that they create in the ether almost kind of reminded me of what was on the walls in the Citadel. And the only reason why I make that connection and that there's a possibility that everything that Kang was doing in terms of the multiverse is because the Eternals are, by definition, a character or a team that has been around forever. And they would almost be able to manipulate time or not pass time the way that normal people do, in a similar way that Kang is able to. So it's possible that the action that was taking place in Loki could feed into some stuff that's supposed to happen in Eternals. Now, the only thing that sort of sets it apart is that Eternals was supposed to come out in theaters a long time ago. So I'm not sure if Loki was supposed to feed directly into Shang-Chi and Eternals. Actually, I'm pretty certain that they weren't. So the next one that seems that everybody's sort of circling towards, saying that, oh, this is going to be picked up immediately from where Loki left off, is Spider-Man No Way Home. And the reason why we can't say definitively whether that's going to be the case or not is because the December movie hasn't even shown a trailer yet. Now, it's very possible that Spider-Man No Way Home didn't show a trailer yet because it's going to talk directly about the multiverse. And so they probably had to wait for Loki to end its first season and for Kang to be eliminated and the multiverse to be born.
No, you can't get to the end until you've been changed by the journey.
It's also possible that Spider-Man No Way Home has nothing to do with the multiverse. This could be an online rumor that's just getting kicked around by people who want to see Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield come over from the Spider-Man Sony movies and show up in the MCU. Still possible, still may happen, but so far the only people that we've been able to really confirm that are showing up in that movie are Jamie Foxx's Electro and Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus, and maybe they're the only two. But we'll see once the first trailer drops how much is suggested about where that movie is going to deal with the repercussions of Loki. The big one that's going to be impacted by the things that happen with Loki is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Now, it has multiverse in the title, and the Hollywood Reporter had a rumor that Tom Hiddleston is also expected to appear. So you're definitely in March of 2022, when Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness drops, you're going to get some continuation about it.
It's crazy, but he could make it work.
Well, this isn't goodbye for Loki because we know that there's going to be a season 2. And honestly, of the shows that have been introduced so far, this is the one that I really want to have a second season because there's so many exciting places where they could potentially go. The idea of time travel, the idea of multiverses is enormous. I hope they keep this creative, the core team together, the people who have sort of built this world and the idea of the TVA. I also think the people in the cast are doing some of the best work that they've ever done, especially Owen Wilson, who is off the charts great as Mobius. So I want to see this cast continue. I don't want to see them sort of discarded to be supporting players in other people's movies. So the minute that Loki Season 2 gets announced, we'll be back here on CinemaBlend's YouTube channel to start to discuss where that season is going to go. I want to thank everybody for sort of following along in these Marvel analysis episodes that started back with WandaVision and continued through Falcon and Winter Soldier, and then all the way through the 6 episodes of Loki. So if you haven't seen the earlier ones that we've done, please make sure that you go back and check those out. We are going to be back with future Marvel shows here on YouTube because we're going to be continuing to track the progress of the MCU. So make sure that you hit subscribe and that you turn on your notifications so that the minute a new video drops on our YouTube channel, you guys will be the very first ones to hear about it.